In August 2014, the Islamic State, known as ISIS, launched a large-scale attack on the 400,000-strong Yazidi community's heartland in Iraq's Sinjar province.
The Yazidi community in Iraq is one of the oldest religious communities in the country. It's unique. It is dissimilar to other Abrahamic faiths because of its unique system of beliefs and view of the ever after. ISIS declared them apostates. And so when ISIS rolled in with their juggernaut 10 years ago, they deemed Yazidis unworthy of life.
Originating in 12th century Mesopotamia, a million endogamous Yazidis' monotheistic religion centers around Kode, creator of the universe, and the 7 angels, ruling the world on God's behalf. The Yazidis are persecuted for their disbelief of the fallen angel, believing all angels are good.
Even though ISIS stated theological justifications and a theological rationale behind the genocide, claiming that it was a duty, a mandate by God that they eliminate the Yazidi people, their true motivations, I believe, were threefold. The first being the expansion of strategic territorial control. The second being the material plunder, the seizing of all of the wealth of the Yazidi communities. And the third was a kind of sexual selfishness, in which ISIS pursued a program of mass sexual enslavement that involved the kidnapping of over 3,500 women and girls.
As 18-year-old Hala and her family were fleeing their hometown of Tel Qasab, their car was stopped at an ISIS checkpoint.
They dragged us out of our car. We were 13 family members. They separated the men from the women and children. They handcuffed the men and took them away. They took the women and children to an abandoned chicken farm and locked us up and threatened to kill us if we dared to escape. A few minutes later, we heard a barrage of gunfire and men yelling, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." The ISIS men were celebrating the execution of dozens of Yazidi men, including my father and one of my brothers.
Violence against the Yazidis is actually not new. Every form of violence that ISIS used against the Yazidi community had already been used against them by the Ottoman authorities in prior centuries. And that violence was justified using the same theological arguments. This included beheading of males, forced conversions, killing those who refused not to convert, as well as the enslavement of women and then the selling of women and other Yazidis in slavery markets.
That same morning, ISIS militants attacked the Hardan village, 30 miles northeast of Hala's home.
It was morning. I wake up and my family was very nervous and they were scared. I asked what is happening. We tried to escape 2 times to get out of the village, but ISIS caught us and they told us to go back to our house and put white flags on the roof of our house.
When ISIS attacked, Faiza Qasim was only 10 years old. Her mother, sister, and 2 younger brothers were given refuge at a Muslim friend's house who wanted to protect them. Faiza's father, grandfather, and uncles returned to their home, but found ISIS militants waiting for them. They had discovered where the rest of the family was hiding and returned the men to the friend's house, handcuffed.
The girl called us and said, "The men are waiting for you downstairs." When we all went, the thing that I saw was my father, my grandfather, and my uncles were waiting for us outside, but there was also ISIS behind them. One of the ISIS was wearing all white, and there was blood on his clothes and a sword in his hand. So I got really scared, and then my dad came and held my hand, and he told me, "It's okay, don't be scared." After that, they put all my family members in a room, and they were recording us and laughing.
The day before the genocide, many Yazidis knew that something was imminent. Many had Arab contacts in Arab communities. Arab friends were calling and saying, something is about to happen, you need to get out, take your family and leave, you are not safe. We are hearing rumors in our community that ISIS is mobilizing. So Yazidis were piling into their cars, putting their kids in the cars, whatever essential possessions they could fit in their vehicles, and then trying to leave. And the Kurdish secret police prevented them from leaving their communities. They were turning them back at the entrances of their villages and telling them, go back to your homes, we're here, the Peshmerga are here, we're gonna protect you, and you should feel ashamed for trying to flee while we are here. You should feel ashamed trying to flee your land while we are here protecting you. Then in the early hours of the morning, as ISIS was attacking the mountain, but before it had arrived, all Kurdish security personnel and military forces collectively withdrew from the Sinjar region. An organized, planned withdrawal.
Then they took us to the checkpoint of the village. The last time I saw my father was him in handcuffs. It was really hard for me to see him in that way, because earlier he told me, it's okay, you don't have to be scared. After that day, I felt there's no one to protect me anymore. So they separated us. I don't know where they took my father, my grandfather, and my uncles. I don't know anything about them. But they took the rest of my family to a big school. There was like lots of Yazidis in it. And then that's it.
Then they took us to Tel Afar and they put us in abandoned school, separated 8 to 9 years old girls from the rest, and transferred us to Mosul Badoush prison, where they tortured and raped the women and children. They treated us worse than animals. They gave us inedible food and contaminated water and beat us. When we asked why they were threatening us like that, they told us we were infidels.
They were forcing us to become like the Muslim, and we had to like follow them and do whatever they wanted, or otherwise they would like punish us. The punishment would be like either hitting us or not giving us food, not getting out of the room.
10 days after horrific torture in Badoush prison, there were air raids around the area, and ISIS leaders took us back to Tel Afar, separated me, my sister, and my sisters-in-law from my mom.
My sister's name is Saadia. Back in 2014, she was 7 years old. They separated my sister from me. They tried to separate me a few times, but I would always like cry and hold on to my mom and to my brothers to keep me with them, and then they kept me with them. If it wasn't because of that, maybe I wouldn't be here.
At the request of the Iraqi government, we've begun operations to help save Iraqi civilians stranded on the mountain. As ISIL has marched across Iraq, it has waged a ruthless campaign against innocent Iraqis. And these terrorists have been especially barbaric towards religious minorities, including Christian and Yazidis, a small and ancient religious sect. I've therefore authorized targeted airstrikes, if necessary, to help forces in Iraq as they fight to break the siege of Mount Sinjar and protect the civilians trapped there. Already, American aircraft have begun conducting humanitarian airdrops of food and water to help these desperate men, women, and children survive.
We can acknowledge that the U.S. played a very important role in preventing this genocide from getting worse. But when ISIS invaded Iraq from Syria and began to actually take control of Iraqi territory, the U.S. did not intervene to stop it. The Iraqi authorities were making calls to U.S. officials, and they were begging for airstrikes. Some of them were speaking on the phone with Joe Biden, who was vice president at the time. But the U.S. deliberately refused because it wanted pressure to mount against Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister, who was not wanting to abdicate his position and allow elections to take place. He was becoming increasingly despotic and anti-democratic, and the U.S. was worried about that tendency that they were observing. That line of action was the beginning of a genocide against the Yazidis, as well as the expulsion of all of Mosul's historical Christian community.
While the Allied forces continued bombardment of ISIS sites, the militants and their Yazidi captive slaves were on the move constantly, taking cover in abandoned buildings and structures across northern Iraq and Syria.
They would always change our location because there was airplane throwing bomb. As much as I can remember, we were in that situation for about 3 years. They took my mom, my 2 younger brothers, and me to Syria, and my sister stayed with my grandmother and my aunts in Iraq.
Our next location was a vast 3-story house in Mosul, full of dozens of Yazidi women. They told us we would be sold. We were petrified. No one could help us. 45-year-old men raped 12-year-old girls in brutal ways and later sold them to other ISIS fighters.
اليوم سوق السبايا، اليوم سوق وما ملكت أيمانكم، اليوم التوزيع.
After successful battles, the fighters came to the house and took 15 girls, each for themselves, as a reward, and took them to Syria, Anbar, and other places to sell them as sex slaves. I was sold 3 times. Every time I was sold, I had worse master than the previous one. My first owner was an ISIS leader older than my father. I was raped, forced to recite the Quran, and was forcibly converted.
The vast majority of Muslims all around the world would today agree that this kind of violence against the Yazidi community or any religious minority is unacceptable and wrong. This is why most Muslims condemn ISIS and consider their behavior reprehensible. When ISIS became very active and powerful in Syria, there were other Muslim intellectuals publishing fatwa guides in Arabic to refute ISIS claims, to refute the claims that jihadists were making.
Life in my hometown was very beautiful and peaceful. We were a big family. My family and my uncles, my grandparents used to live in a big house. I remember when I used to come back from school when I was young, I would see all my family waiting for me so we can eat all together. And I also remember when my mother's family would come and visit us in my house, and me, my cousins, my siblings would play in the backyard. We would play soccer and other sports. But in ISIS captivity. Me, my mom, and my two brothers wake up in the morning. We couldn't get out of the room. They would just bring us the food, and then if they made a mess, they would tell me that I have to go and wash the dishes, clean the floor. I had to do everything, and they wouldn't allow me to use the hot water. It always had to be the cold water. There's not just man ISIS, there's also women. One of the men that we were in his house, he had his wife also. His wife would also treat me bad, and if I didn't do the dishes or if I didn't do what she wanted to me, she would yell at me and get angry at me, and she would tell me to clean all the house, and she wouldn't clean it or take care of it. I was the only one to clean the house.
My day would start with cleaning my owner's house and cooking for them. If they didn't like the food or how I cleaned the house, I was beaten. I was not allowed to leave the house, talk to anyone, or call anyone on the phone. My life was unbearable. I contemplated suicide a few times.
While Hala Safil and Faiza Qasim endured intense ISIS brutality, tens of thousands of Yazidis fleeing ISIS and their hometowns were trapped on Mount Sinjar in northern Iraq.
I was actually in northern Iraq in 2014 when this genocide began. August 3rd was an incredibly hot Iraqi day. There were many towns that were being attacked and people killed in the streets. The south side of the mountain received the brunt of the initial attack because that's the area where the ISIS forces arrived first. So most of the people on the south side began fleeing to the mountain and trying to ascend its slopes. Many people died of dehydration. Many elderly people died of heart attacks or other conditions. Diabetics, people with disabilities who couldn't walk. Many of them lay stranded. In some cases, young men had to decide, which parent am I going to carry? If I have two elderly parents, my mother and my father, neither of whom can walk up the side of an incredibly steep mountain on a hot summer day, we have to stop and have a family meeting and discuss who is going to come on this journey and who is going to sit on the side of the mountain and die. There are photographs of young Yazidi men putting one parent on their back while another parent sits and says goodbye. There are photos of Yazidi men with their parents in wheelbarrows. On top of the mountain, the Yazidis who made it to the top, the majority of them, lived for several days with no food, no water. Some people were eating leaves. Some people killed domestic animals and ate raw meat to try to stay alive. Some mothers tried to keep their infants alive using their own saliva. Some people committed suicide because it was a situation they saw no way out of. They were slowly dying. Children began dying. Many children died.
The mount was completely surrounded by ISIS terrorists. More than 200,000 Yazidis were stuck on the plateau of the mount without water and food. Iraqi aviation decided to send 3 helicopters to the mount in order to bring food and water.
Mirza Denai is a German-based Iraqi Yazidi human rights activist and co-founder of Airbridge Iraq, conducting airlift evacuations of Yazidi women and children from ISIS-controlled areas of Iraq to provide medical support.
This is the map that I was working with during the helicopter mission. And this is where the IDP people are. I volunteered with the helicopter crew to join them and fly with them to the mount in order to bring food and water to the Yazidis. We're flying about 40 minutes each flight, and we had to fly at least 2,000 meters over the ground because ISIS was shooting the helicopters, and the crew, they shoot it back. And for each of these flights, we had to try to pick up some women, children, and men from the mount, and we gave them food and water. Between 2007 and 2014, we have treated 150 Iraqi children from different communities: Yazidis, Christians, Muslims, Sunni and Shia, Arabs, Kurds. We didn't care about the identity of children. We wanted to help any child who needed our support.
They lost father and mother.
The tragic consequence of the ISIS attacks led to desperate, death-defying attempts by the Yazidis as hovering helicopters were taking off from Sinjar mountain. A Yazidi man clung onto the helicopter landing gear for a while before pulling himself into the safety of the cockpit. Another Yazidi man attempted the same, but slid off, falling to his tragic death. 9 days into the humanitarian flights, one of the overloaded Soviet-era helicopters that Mirza was on board crashed on Mount Sinjar soon after takeoff, killing the pilot and injuring many others.
In 2014 of August, where our helicopter has crashed on the mount, and I survived with a miracle, with broken leg and ribs. After my helicopter crash, I went to Germany. Couldn't stay longer, so I went back with a wheelchair to Iraq because I saw the suffering, and I couldn't forget the pictures and of those people who were suffering, who are in the free and under the trees, the unfinished building. More than 200,000 stuck on the mount. 6,500 women and children were in the hand of ISIS, and only a couple of them were freed at the beginning.
After escaping a near-death incident, Mirza Denai fully immersed himself in life-saving missions, raising global awareness of the plight of the Yazidi people and establishing a resettlement program in Germany for victimized Yazidi women and children.
Now, the liberation process of different areas has been started, but no woman.
We started this program and we resettled 1,100 Yazidi women and children. Not only Yazidi, a couple of Christians who were in the captivity have been also resettled through our program to Germany in 2015.
Zugleich bringt den Leuten Hoffnung, den einfachen Menschen.
Lamia Haji Bashar, one of the girls Mirza saved, was 15 when she was abducted by ISIS. She remained captive for 18 months before she managed to flee with 2 other girls. While running, one of the girls stepped on a landmine, which killed the 2 girls and blinded Lamia, leaving her face disfigured.
So she lost both eyes and the body was completely burnt, her face was burnt. She was suffering a lot. And I took her to Germany and we saved one of her eyes. And after saving her eyes, Lamia told me, if you want, I would like to join you. I would like to speak to the people and tell them about the crimes that ISIS did to my family and to our people.
Lamia joined Mirza, becoming the voice for the captive Yazidi women. For her courage, Lamia received the European Union's highest human rights award, the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. She shared the prize with Yazidi survivor and activist, future Nobel Peace Prize winner Nadia Murad.
When Daesh attacked my village, I was 15 years old. They killed all the men in the village, including my brother, my father, relatives young and old. They killed the older women and they divided the younger girls up. And we were then traded on the slave market. I myself was sold 4 times by Daesh. Every single time I was sold, I tried to escape, but they captured me again. The last person who bought me was an Iraqi doctor. He used to torture me. He used to torture all the Yazidi women, together with a friend of mine, Catherine, and a 9-year-old girl. All of us were raped by this doctor. The 3 of us actually managed to escape. But before we actually arrived to safety, Catherine accidentally walked over a landmine and it exploded. And the last thing I heard was her death scream. And it was awful. Absolutely awful. It was the worst thing I have ever heard. I would like to thank all of you for this prize. I think that this prize is a prize for every woman and girl that has been sexually enslaved by ISIS.
In 2016, while Lamia and Nadia were accepting their Sakharov Prize, Faiza Qasim and Hala Safil remained captive, enduring daily ISIS brutality for another year. Faiza and her family remained enslaved in Syria, while Hala continued to be traded as a sex slave in Iraq.
In summer of 2017, I got injured during heavy battles between the Iraqi forces and ISIS fighters in Mosul, where I was held. On July 1st, I convinced myself to either live free or die and threw myself into the crossfire on the battlefield. "I'm a Yazidi girl," I screamed, and surrendered to the Iraqi forces. After 3 years of slavery, I was freed again. I was back with my people. It was bittersweet. I was free, but to this date, I haven't heard from my mother, my father, or my 3 brothers.
After staying in ISIS captivity for about 3 years, we managed to escape in 2017. Then we stayed in the camps for about 5 to 6 months, and the Canadian government brought us here to Canada.
I live in a tent at the Bersif 2 camp in Zaho with my surviving siblings. My brother survived an ISIS mass execution, and my 3 sisters, one of whom was shot in the shoulder. After going through torture and indignities, it's very difficult to call a tent home, a home without a proper roof over your head.
When the U.S. airstrikes began, local Yazidi PKK affiliates, together with PKK forces from Syria, where PKK affiliates had been allies of the U.S., as well as PKK guerrillas from Turkey, were able to fight through ISIS lines and reach Sinjar mountain and begin evacuating Yazidi people off the top of the mountain. It is not known how many lives were saved, but it is hard to overestimate. It could be as many as 100,000 people were saved because of that evacuation effort. Those people who survived that fate on top of the mountain were then taken into empty buildings and schools, and eventually those areas were converted into permanent camps.
Last week I was back in northern Iraq speaking with 9 Yazidi sisters. Mother's been murdered, father's been murdered, and now these 9 young girls, they all live together alone in a tent, and they've been there for 8 years, 2014 to 2022, in this massive refugee camp 15,000 people, and these people have nowhere to go. So there's 250,000 Yazidis that live inside the 21 camps. But there's another 250,000, 250,000 people living on the side of the road with just 4 poles and a blue tarp UN or blankets over, and they're urinating and defecating in the back of these tents. No toilets, no showers, little makeshift kitchen with a propane burner to cook their food. And then at the back of the tent, there's a blanket hanging. And then you go back there and there's just a pot, an old beat up aluminum pot. And that's where they relieve themselves. And that's how they live.
Life in the camps is not a fun life. You can have these major international NGOs, you can have major branches of the UN apparatus, all there implementing this massive NGO system, this massive humanitarian system. But at the end of it all, you have children who, if they were adolescents when this genocide began, have now lived their entire teenage years in a tent on a strip of gravel in the hot, baking summer sun and freezing cold winter. That's the life that they know now.
Today is Christmas Eve. It's December 24th, 2015, and we are coming into SCN camp. I'm here with Zuhair and Erevan. We are here with this family, and this mom and little daughter were separated for 2 months and held by ISIS for 15 months. 15 months they were held for. A very serious situation. They just came into the camp yesterday.
Her name is Hania.
Hania.
And when she was under ISIS control, ISIS told her that we will change your name from Hania to Maha. Maha is an Islamic name. It's a Muslim name. So he said I was crying, and they put their hand here from and take her hair and said you have to say Maha. My name is Maha.
Yeah. When you sit in those dirty tents in this massive refugee camp, as I have dozens of times with probably over 100 young women, I came to help the Yazidis again. Yeah. So I brought you a gift, and they turn to me and say in Kurdish or Kurmanji with my translator there, my volunteer translator, and they say, Pastor William, why are you the only Westerner that will come? There's big organizations over there, but who's coming and sitting in the tent? Pray with them, comfort them, and say to them, I'm here to give you hope. I'm here to give you encouragement. So that's what the Western Church needs to do. That's what all of us who are comfortable, who are safe, who are secure, why can't we get out of our comfort zones and go to these places that are desperately needing hope and love? They need joy, they need support and encouragement.
As someone who was at the State Department when we were trying to solve the question of ISIS occupation, we often focused on terminology, and both the Obama administration and the Trump administration called the ISIS attack against Yazidis and Christians and others a genocide. I was proud that our country described it as such, but at the same time, we failed to conduct any search for the missing, to try to find out where the living are. And as time continues to pass, I think it's a tragedy that these loved ones remain unaccounted for, which is only going to slow the healing process and continue to lead Yazidis to flee for the West or other countries.
Life in Canada is very safe, and it is better than staying in camps. But of course, I always miss my house and my family. I'm always hopeful, and I always pray for my father and my sister to come back. But my mom is sick, and we not sure what her disease is, but the doctors say it's like a nerve disease, and they say maybe there's no cure for it.
So you're a 19-year-old student taking care of your mother?
Yeah. Taking care of my brothers, my mom. It's really hard for someone to go through all that and then come to Canada and have this disease where you expect you're gonna have a better life.
My community encouraged me to tell my story, defend the Yazidi cause, and raise awareness of girls' and women's abuse worldwide, so that what happened to me never happens again. I wanted to further my education, but I now work to provide for what's left of my family. I work for Yazda, an organization that protects ethnic and religious minority rights in Iraq and the Levant.
Since 2019, Yazda, in collaboration with the Iraqi authorities, the United Nations, and other international NGOs, have embarked on exhumation activities of Yazidi mass graves in areas previously controlled by ISIS.
There are still over 80 ISIS mass graves of Yazidis to be exhumed, where many of my extended family are. I still don't know if their remains will be recovered and if I will ever give a proper burial to my father and the rest of my lost family.
I haven't heard anything about mass graves that include my family, but they did like the DNA testing, and we still don't know anything about them. I have 21 family members that is still missing, and I haven't heard anything about them in 8 years. I don't know what happened to them, where they are they alive, are they not?
I want to see ISIS operative and their collaborators held accountable by the international courts on the crime they perpetrated against my people.
Let us remember that the crimes committed by ISIS against women and girls are unlike anything we have witnessed in modern times. ISIS controlled territory the size of the United Kingdom and ruled over 8 million people. More than 40,000 foreign fighters from 110 countries are estimated to have joined ISIS's ranks in Iraq and Syria. But the question of bringing them to justice has barely raised a whisper.
Ladies and gentlemen,
if I had the chance to look into the eyes of ISIS fighters, I would say why they did this to the Yazidi people. Why would they kill their men? Why would they rape their women? Why did they do that? We didn't do anything to ISIS. We didn't do anything. We were just a small community that not much of the world knew about, and they started to attack us, and they forced us to change our beliefs and change our culture and change our identity.
My future and the future of my people is unknown. We still live in fear, especially since the Iraqi government relocated ISIS families from Syria to our areas in Iraq.
The ISIS ideology remains very active at a more underground level within Iraqi society, just as it did throughout the years of the Iraq War.
In addition to continued ISIS threats, the Yazidi Sinjar region of Iraq is now frequently targeted by Turkish air raids as part of Turkey's military assault against the Kurdistan Workers' Party in Iraqi Kurdistan.
The Turkish airstrikes against Sinjar are a continuation of the genocide that ISIS began. They continue to make Sinjar insecure. It continues to fill Yazidis with fear that perhaps this isn't a place with a future, a place we can raise our children, a place where our children can walk to school without fear of bombs dropping on them.
The assault has displaced thousands of villagers, killing hundreds of civilians, including most recently the 12-year-old Yazidi boy, Salah Kudur.
Unfortunately, the genocide is still ongoing because 2/3 of Yazidi people are still in the refugee camps and IDP camps. Now, 8 years gone, and we have still almost 3,000 Yazidi women and children in the captivity of ISIS. We don't know anything about their destiny.
And there are so many mass graves that we don't know about, and there's so many dead bodies that hasn't been discovered or hasn't been identified. And there's so many other Yazidi people that are missing in the camps in Syria, in Iraq. No one knows where they are. So I want to ask that if anyone can help to find those people, or even help to identify those bodies, because it's very hard to not see your father, your sister, the rest of your family for 8 years and not have contact with them. And not only that, you don't know if they're alive, if they're not, where they are, what they're doing now, how is ISIS treating them.
Many are believed to be held with their captors in a detainment camp in eastern Syria called Al-Hol. And if that is true, it is tragic that we've abandoned the victims with their victimizers in this camp and thrown away the key.
In recognition of outstanding dedication and passion to saving Yazidi lives, the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative awarded Mirza Denai's organization, Air Bridge Iraq, the 2019 Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity at a ceremony held in Yerevan, capital of Armenia.
Thank you very much.
As the first nation to adopt Christianity in 301 AD as its state religion, Armenia is also home to the world's largest Yazidi temple.
The Yazidis and Armenians have a common history of the suffering, because in Armenian genocide 1915, there were thousands of Yazidis who became also victims of that genocide. We have now about 35,000 Yazidis in Armenia here, but they kept their tradition, they kept their religion, and they are well integrated in the Armenian community. This shows how important the coexistence is in this country.
Mirza Denai dedicated the $1 million Aurora Prize Fund towards building the House of Coexistence in Sinjar, Iraq, which opened in July 2022.
I called it House of Coexistence because I wanted to establish peace and have a new positive life in this region after the genocide. I think the most important issue in this country that we had is the civil war between Sunni and Shia, and then minority groups, non-Muslim minority groups, became victims of this misunderstanding. Religious wars are the most terrible wars in the world. Therefore, finding a base and a platform for a dialogue in order to bring all these people together, people from different roots, religious or ethnic roots, this will establish a sustainable peace, and this is so huge, so crucial and important.
After 9 years, this is the first time I'm visiting my village Hardan in Iraq. The war turned my village into piles of rubble, a ghost town. This is my street, almost every house damaged. As we got closer, my heart beat faster and faster. And there it was, my house. Still familiar, yet changed.
It brings lots of happy memories, but it's also very sad to visit my house. And I have my father, my sister, my uncles, my aunt, and my grandparents are still missing. There was 15 family members of mine in this house. Now it's only me and my brothers, my mom. It's just the four of us. We used to live all together. We used to play in the backyard. I would go to school and I couldn't wait to come back and see my family. Now it's been 9 years. I haven't seen any of them. This was our room. We used to sleep together, wake up together, laugh together, eat together. And now I don't have anyone to laugh with them or talk about how my day was. Now it's just this room, just four walls, that it's empty. ISIS attacked us because they said we weren't true believers. They said we didn't believe in God. But that's just not true. We Yazidis have our own faith, our own way of worshiping the divine. It's different, sure, but that doesn't make it wrong. They tried to erase us. They tried to force us to convert, to forget our language, everything that made us Yazidi, but they failed. Yes, they enslaved me. The scars they left define them, not me. I'm still Yazidi. My faith is what keeps me going. The colors of my dreams. The fire in my heart. I won't be afraid to pray anymore. I'll raise my voice, tell the stories of my people. Let everyone know the Yazidi spirit can't be broken.